To the Doulas No Squat Book Club. This week we're discussing Breastfeeding Without Birthing, a breastfeeding guide for mothers through adoption, surrogacy, and other special circumstances. We'll be covering topics including breastfeeding goals, benefits, and critics. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get ready to hear from some doulas who know squat.
Anyway,
On track.
back on track. That was a long tangent.
No. All right, so I wanted to read this part out of the book at the very, I think it's at the very end of this chapter. Keep your list of reasons nearby to offer you encouragement along the journey. I thought that would.
That is the very last sentence of the chapter. Okay.
And I thought that's, I mean, that's very good advice for like any goal that you're trying to work towards.
Mm-hmm.
How, like, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but how do you address the goals for nursing prenatally before a baby is born? Is that something that you do as like with postpartum planning with your clients?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that is talked about generally in prenatal too, where we're talking about, like, we actually have a postpartum plan. We're saying who's doing the chores, let's establish who's cooking, who's doing laundry, and for the first 3 days, mom's name's not allowed to be on that list. You just had a baby, so you're not doing any of that. And then we slowly, like, move in. And during that conversation is when we talk about what are your, and the way that we say, what are your feeding goals?
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about, you know, what their thoughts are as far as how that's probably gonna work, how they envision it. A lot of times we get an answer of just like, we plan to breastfeed, and that's probably the most common answer that we get. And then I'll ask, like, did you order a pump? Do you have insurance? Do you plan? Like, do you need to talk about that? Do you have one?
You tested it out?
Yeah.
Do you feel like it fits?
A lot of times I put it together for them before I leave.
Yeah.
Just the more confidence that they feel because their stuff is already put together has a lot to do with those things. And I do a lot of listening prenatally. And then I encourage them to take a breastfeeding class. And all of my doula clients get my childbirth education class, which has breastfeeding basics in it. And so they've already watched that before prenatal too. So they already have, like, questions for me before I go in.
Yeah, that's good. Do you ever like go like through their reasons why with them to help them? Like,
I have not been, but maybe I should start. My prenatals are gonna be 4 hours.
like, whenever you think about, like, if you're including a bunch of this like breastfeeding stuff that, like, really, especially if you get into some of these special circumstances, like, I mean, breastfeeding with adoption is you're really going to need to be like having your why being kind of forefront in your mind, like whenever you're trying to induce lactation, it's like, right, the pumps are not fun. There's a lot of tedium, and then it also mentions somewhere in here about how whenever you're starting lactation, there, like, the hormonal changes start to happen. It's almost like pregnancy in and of itself, how you have like some hormonal surges that is going to affect your day-to-day life and how you respond to things whenever you have those hormones that are really fluctuating.
Yeah, the fluctuating hormones, even depending on, like, what time of day that you're pumping or feeding, like, you're going to be making way more at 3 a.m. than you're going to be making at like 6 p.m. And I feel like that's probably one of the most important things that I tell my pumping moms. I'm like, hey, I just want to let you know. And then my most common response is, I have to get up at 4 a.m. to huh? I'm like, it's have to. I said, if you're low, that's a good time to do it.
Oh, it's like if you are going to want to pump like only once a day, the most important time to do it would be first thing in the morning.
Mhm.
Like if you want to get the most out of a pump, now one pumping session during the day, or like really any, but that first morning pumping session is going to give you the most bang for your butt.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about like hormonal change, I can't remember what the term was, but I saw this post the other day. They were basically like naming that postpartum period, the hormonal shift, and like comparing it to how much your body changes during puberty. And it's like they were like, it's just another stage of life that your body is going through hormonally, and it's gonna be that much of a dramatic change. And maybe dramatic's not the right word, but noticeable.
Significant.
Yeah, significant. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting. It's one of those words that's like, I read it. I don't know if I should try to say it out loud, but they were giving a term for it.
Never be afraid to mispronounce a word. Someone will correct you and then they'll know how to say it. That's my philosophy.
Is there anything else in chapter 1 that really stood out to anybody? You highlighted things that I couldn't read.
Go back and read it.
Should I go to mention that one later? But one was that postpartum depression can also happen to adoptive mothers, and breastfeeding can help. I feel like that's a very important point to make. We also know that postpartum depression can affect postpartum doulas. It can. Anybody who is like caring for an infant could really be impacted. Even partners. It's just the realities of caring for an infant.
Yeah. With postpartum doula, you can care for multiple infants in the same day. They're like, oh, I finally got this infant good, and now you're gonna have a wonderful rest of the day, and they're all set. And you go to the next house and they're screaming, you're like, yeah, let's start over.
You fix one and then like instead of basking in the joy, you get to go fix it.
Yep. It's a great job though. You get to fall in love with a bunch of babies at the same time and a bunch of moms at the same time.
Yeah, but you're just like so warm and fuzzy. Like, I can't even. I like nanny one baby, and I feel like warm and fuzzy afterwards. Can't imagine like seeing 3 big cutie babies all day.
Yes. That's fantastic. Yes. I mean, like, you fall in love with a bunch of different babies and families and circumstances, and yeah. I have a great job. Anyway.
Love it.
All right. So chapter 2 starts off talking about support options. How do you help clients find both their like general postpartum support people and their breastfeeding support people, because they aren't necessarily the same people?
I love Facebook groups.
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate for Facebook groups. And then tell people just to reach out to them. For sure.
Yeah. I like national online groups because then in the middle of the night you can get on and there's other people
Someone
that are
awake.
that are awake somewhere in the world that also knows how to breastfeed. And then I like in-person local support because there is a lot to be said about sitting next to another person who's breastfeeding, especially if that person has gone through what you're currently going through, if you're struggling in any sort of way. And so that's pretty big, especially like a well-run in-person support group.
Yeah, we have several really good ones in our area. I really encourage parents to attend a breastfeeding support group before baby arrives. Because the best way to learn is to see it being done, and especially for those and like that have like no one else in their immediate circle that have breastfed. I mean, if they do, then that's going to be the best place for them to go. If they have someone already in their circle that has breastfed, just like making sure that they're connecting with them is important.
Yeah, I agree with that. I get nervous for some of the bad advice that gets handed down generationally. We're not speaking well. Today, English is our second language. Generationally, that then gets perpetuated if your main support person is somebody else who breastfed but might have been given really bad white knuckle through it breastfeeding advice. Was my personal experience. And so that's how I know, like, my mom was taught that breastfeeding is supposed to be painful. So then she taught my sister and I that breastfeeding is supposed to be painful. And so then when we started having things like bleeding nipples, mastitis, like we needed to go see and get actual help, she was just like, nope, this is just how it is. So had I been in a breastfeeding support group, I could have learned, nope, no, it's not. And let's help, you know?
Yeah, if you're like, to kind of go along with that, if you have like one person that is your main support person, them coming along with you to some of these support.
Yes. And see, she knows now. Now we've got a lot of babies. Now a lot of us are involved in, you know, women's health in some way. My sisters and I, we all are actually. She's extremely well informed. Now she's a wonderful source to go to at this point, but at the time, that was not good to have her as both of our only source of information.
Okay. Don't ever like narrow down your source of information to just one person.
Right.
Yeah. It's always good to have like a well-rounded perspectives, more than one. Like even if you're seeing a lactation professional, sometimes getting some outside perspectives can help round out your experience and finding exactly what's going to work for your individual situation.
Yeah, which is where the support groups come in really handy because there's a bunch of people in there. You have a bunch of different life lessons and experiences to learn from. And so if it's well run, where you have a professional who knows how to run a group.
And make sure that there's no harmful advice being given.
Exactly. That's like, that's where you go.
Yeah, finding out other parents like life hacks is always
yes.
They're like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I remember the first time that somebody told me you can use the diaper to like wipe your baby when they poop first and then start using wipes. And I was just like, go to the groups. Saves you.
That's so funny.
It's true. Anyway.
I'm just I just find it funny because I always did that when cleaning my baby's bottoms.
I don't think I've ever done that. Changing a diaper, but
So like because I cloth diaper.
Terrible.
It's like because I cloth diaper whenever I use disposable wipes, I'm very like stingy with my wipes. I'm trying to get as much off with the diaper that I'm going to wash before I use it.
So when I watch your children, I'm not stingy with wipes. My goal is to give you back a baby whose butt is not red. That is it.
Maybe a nanny right now. They're like, I don't know how to describe it other than it's like, just come away with the diaper. It's like one wipe. You're done. And I'm like, miracle. I don't even know if your parents appreciate you.
don't even realize how rare this is.
I-
Okay, so on page 39, there's a sidebar on when others are critical. Have you had to help a client through handling a critical a person who is critical of breastfeeding in their life? How do you approach it?
Depends on the situation.
Like they don't want them to breastfeed?
Yeah. You haven't run into that before?
I don't think so.
It really depends on who the person is, why they're being critical, and if my client even needs it. You know, I run into a situation where the client's mom, so the grandmother of the baby, was critical. And the feeling that I got from it, just from, you know, the mom being there for the conversations and whatnot, and me listening in on them, was that she felt like if her daughter was going to all these lengths to breastfeed her baby, then that was a really important thing that she had not done for her daughter, and that it was then being critical of her. And so
What if
not
people get so in
wanting,
their head?
right?
People
Well,
get so in their head.
people are so afraid of what other people think about them, and she didn't want to be seen as less. And so if formula was good enough for her, then formula is good enough for her granddaughter, and that was that. And so she saw it as being critical of her, and so therefore became critical. As far as how I handled that, it was a lot of walking them through healing, a lot of talk about, you know, generational grace, learning things, you know, stuff we didn't know about breastfeeding at the time, just really making sure that as I was sitting in on the conversation and everything that I added in, I was kind of showing mom like how she could have a conversation with her mother where she wasn't putting down formula, she was just lifting breastfeeding. And that helped quite a bit. You know, sometimes we'll have people that are critical of breastfeeding because they're protective of the person who is breastfeeding and it's not going well at the time. And it is a lot of work. And they don't understand why they can't just formula feed so that they can get back to sleeping, to not going through the pumping or that SMS feeding and the, you know, the oral tie revisions and, you know, just don't even do it and just give them a bottle and it's fine. And so they're being from a protective standpoint. And so then I talk to them about how you can be protective of somebody by supporting what they want to do instead of by trying to force them to do what you think is best for them. Some people take that really well, some people don't. You know, that's not going to be something that you can, I also cannot force that onto them, but sometimes opening to that perspective is really helpful where I say, you know, she's going to do this no matter what. And it would be so much easier for her and you would be getting her so much closer to your goal of her getting to sleep and whatnot if you were supportive instead of critical. And then start giving them options like, here's a great way that you can help. Maybe while she's pumping, you feed the baby. And then it takes half the amount of time, you know, from that perspective. Or sometimes you have dads think that the only way that they can bond with baby, or grandmothers think the only way they can bond with baby is by feeding the baby. And so then I actually have a handout that I give that says these are ways to bond with your child that have nothing to do with feeding them. And going over that can sometimes really help them not be critical anymore.
There's partners who believe that that a breastfed baby is going to be like a mama's boy or things to that effect. That by breastfeeding it means that they're just excluded from the equation. They're going to become overly dependent on mom.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes them feel like the lesser parent because they're not providing nutrition. And there's definitely a lot of bonding that happens in breastfeeding. We talk about that quite a bit. But there's bonding in caring for your child in so many ways. You know, any form of skin to skin, honestly. You know, and I have had parents that they'll say, we're breastfeeding for a couple of weeks because we know that it's really important. But then after that, we're not going to anymore because he wants to feed the baby. And then I said, you know what sounds really great to me? What if in those couple of weeks that you're already planning on breastfeeding, it is his job to burp and change baby after. And we turn it into a little like ritual routine, like pick like a song that he can sing to her, intentionally do skin to skin. And you can just see them being like, oh, that sounds great. And then they become so attached to that they actually want to continue breastfeeding because that's their thing, and then that could be really helpful. And then the baby is extremely attached to both parents. I see it as a positive thing that they want their baby to be attached to them, which just redirects the energy, essentially.
Yeah.
I think most situations I've been, the dads are just so oblivious. They're like, tell me what to do. Like,
Whatever you say, and that happens as well.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do, I'm down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then sometimes they just think, once again, because I work with a lot of teen moms, they think it's inappropriate. They sexualize teenagers' breasts in a way that they sometimes don't sexualize adult breasts. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, she's a teen mom, so that's inappropriate for her to breastfeed.
That's like, what is it called? Like the Madonna word complex.
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely.
Yeah. So run into that pretty often as well, especially with like sometimes the dad, the teen moms do stick around. There's a stigma saying that they never do. Sometimes they do, and then they're like, oh, I don't want her to breastfeed because like we're so young, like it's weird.
Oh gosh,
that one's hard. That one, it really depends on the dad and how much access I have to them, because generally in that situation, I'm meeting him at the birth. They don't tend to come to prenatals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for adoptive mothers, it is mentioned, she goes into some depth about how they need to make the decision about if they want to breastfeed in the hospital, in those situations where they're actually going to the hospital when baby is born, and how there can be some negative signs to trying to initiate that in the hospital, with the birthing mother like seeing that intimate of a relationship between the adoptive mother and the infant. Sometimes they cancel the adoption process. How do you think you could support someone who is making that decision? Like, I know we haven't actually had to do that in practice, but I felt like we could brainstorm some ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the key phrase that you used is see it. So really what would need to happen is for them to go into a separate space to do that. So, and there's plenty of them in hospitals and different areas that you can go to in the antepartum space where they can breastfeed completely separately and then come back, which I would also think would probably be good for, the family that is the gestational family, there we go, to kind of have some healing time where the baby and the adopted family is not in the room. Mm-hmm. So I would see that as two separate positives. But as you said, I don't have any experience with it, but if I did, that would be my initial thought.
Yeah. I don't think that it's super normal for the adoptive parent and the birthing mom to be in the same room. So that was really interesting. Mm-hmm. And that when I was reading that, especially for her just like to be hanging out in the room while
it would probably be more
was asleep. Mm-hmm. He's like asleep in the room, and I was like, they must have had some kind of relationship beforehand.
And some of them do.
Yeah.
The family that I worked with that adopted, they went to the hospital once the gestational mom was in labor, and they had established a relationship with her during her pregnancy.
Yeah.
But they did not go into the labor room at any point. The baby was brought to them in a separate space.
Yeah, that's what I think is more standard than maybe she was supporting her as a doula by chance.
Possibly. And some people really want to be involved in the
Yeah.
birth of the baby that they're going to be caring for. And so they request to be in the space, is my
Yeah.
understanding. Especially for surrogacy.
Yeah.
So
I feel like it would probably be more common in the situation of surrogacy for the intended parent to be there during the birth because it is their baby.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of in the situation of adoption where the adoption is not finalized.
Yeah, that was really interesting to me. I just never, I mean, I'm sure it totally happens. I believe that happens, but every scenario that I've heard is not typically like you're just hanging out, like for the mom's asleep, you're holding baby, and like that scenario is just really interesting to me before papers have been signed, you know. So that just seems like pretty different than what my understanding of what that looks like at this point.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then like kind of on the other side of this question is like, have you ever needed to support someone in a hospital setting that was not able to put baby to breast, that was a breastfeeding parent, or that you able to get them the resources that they needed to support them in the spot?
I think that's pretty common, especially with C-section moms.
And NICU babies.
Yep.
And even beyond that, like I personally had an experience being in a hospital with a different child while being a breastfeeding parent, and then needing to get the supplies that were available to me in the hospital for the infant that was not with me. So like even if you are in a hospital outside of a birthing setting, a lot of hospitals will still have the pumps and private places that you can pump to help you support your supply.
Storage materials. What you can run into is lack of refrigeration. And so then it comes into really like being extremely diligent with labeling and frequently reminding nursing staff that is occurring and to please keep it together. And we know you're very busy and we understand, but you know, we are very intentionally doing this and we want to make sure that everything is properly stored. And sometimes they're not familiar with what that means. And so just making sure that with each nurse shift change, that information is being very respectfully but fully conveyed. Now, I'm not assuming that you don't know this. We're just really trying to make sure that she's working really hard for this milk and that it doesn't get misplaced or improperly stored. Having a bag that it can be put into helps it not get lost quite so much. Because a lot of times it's just put in the communal fridge when you're not on the L&D floor. And then to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of our hospitals in this area don't have refrigerators in the rooms, and you are expected to use the nutrition room refrigerator for your breast milk storage.
Yeah, and like if you didn't want to do that, you could like have a cooler too and have someone who could there.
If that's accessible to you.
Yeah.